season of the offseason is actually here. We are in the dark for, I guess, the next 5 weeks. Not like Aaron Rodgers in the dark, but we're gonna have a little light on. We're gonna have a little light on in the dark. We're gonna have some fun with it. And if you tuned into our last podcast last week, we are going to be doing our Bengals top 25 players entering 2023. And like I said, you guys know who number 1 is, but we're going to count from the top starting at number 25. And today we are talking about La'el Collins, who Andrew, Mike, and myself voted on, just as we voted on the other 24 players. He is at number 25. We're going to talk about why he's at 25, why he could have been higher, why he barely made the cut, and much more. Welcome into a special top 25 edition of the Strictly Stripes podcast. Muhammad Ahmad and Mike Neislick and Andrew Gillis here with you after the long holiday weekend. And speaking of the weekend, we want to let you guys know that if you haven't already over the weekend, make sure you let us know why you're a Bengals fan. Go to strictlystripes.com and click on the form that says, well, I'm a Bengals fan. Fill out the Google Doc form. Or if it's easier, you can send us an email directly at stripes@cleveland.com. We're actually going to read our first response later in the show after we talk about La'el Collins. But make sure you do that if you haven't already, because we're going to keep reading some responses and maybe have one of our respondents on the pod at some point this summer. So make sure you do that. Okay, so like I said, we ranked all the guys. We got to La'el Collins at number 25. And before we get into it, I'm just curious. I'll say whether I had him at 25 or not. But when you guys made like your individual list before we made our collective list, did either of you guys like actually have La'el Collins at number 25?
No, he did not get any votes other than Andrew. But he was the highest up out of the on players that only had one vote. I think the other people that got one were Travion Williams and Brad Robbins. So
that's right. I had Brad Robbins.
But Andrew had him at 24, I believe. So he ended up getting, we did a point system. So he ended up at 25.
Yes, it was a point system. Good clarification. That's pretty much how we got to the conclusion. But Andrew, I guess I'll have to jump to you then, because I didn't realize it was you. So you had him on that list at 25. What was your reasoning and justification behind that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, kind of like Mike said, you look at the list. I thought it was pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory. I had, I had Evan McPherson kind of in the top 22. I had offense and defense in the top 22, and then I had La'el Collins at 24. So, I kind of had him as my, I guess you could say, first off the bench. I had him ranked above Myles Murphy. I had him ranked above Charlie Jones. I had him ranked above DJ Turner. I'm trying to think, Brad Robbins, Travion Williams. Like the reason that I did was because, I think when you look at some of these guys, that were on the list, and like, I would have had a problem ranking La'el behind a Brad Robbins who has not played in an NFL game yet, or behind a Myles Murphy who has not played in an NFL game yet. It's just we haven't really seen those guys. I think if we were to do a top 25 Bengals of September, if we were to do this list in October, I would bet you La'el Collins would certainly not be on it for me. It's just right now I really had a hard time kind of ranking some of the rookies behind him, some of the rookies ahead of him, just because you look at the list and I don't know. I think that Collins, when he was healthy towards the end of the year last year, he actually started to play that play that position pretty well. His run blocking was obviously a plus. His pass blocking left something to be desired, but I just think that Collins was steady down the stretch. And I mean, for a roster of, 53 guys, I think that, 24th, 25th is fair.
So before you jump in, Mike, I want to say something about that, because you made an interesting point about, if I was making this list later, I wouldn't have had him on. But right now I have a hard time putting the rookies ahead of him. But here's the thing. DJ Turner, I get, because we don't know exactly what he's going to look like next year, what's his role going to be. But I mean, like Brad Robbins, though, and I think Mike had Travion Williams, like we know for a fact Brad Robbins we can all assume is going to be the punter. Like, I would think he's going to beat out Drew Chrisman if he keeps
Right.
punting the way he is. Like, he's going to make an impact. Like, even if it's only for a couple times on the field, hopefully you don't want him on the field too often because you want your offense to get going. But if and when he is on the field, you're going to see him do more than La'el Collins, because La'el Collins probably is not going to start the season healthy. He's probably going to be on the PUP list, which we talked about last week with our takeaways. And even then, when he's healthy, he's going to be, I would think, behind Jonah Williams as the swing tackle. So like what Hakeem Adeniji was last year, that's going to be La'el Collins. And I don't know how many times you're going to see the field as a swing tackle versus being a third down back like Travion Williams or a punter like Brad Robbins. So I know we're not in the season, but like I feel like just right now, though, we can already say, yeah, this is going to be Collins' role. This is what it's going to be. Like, so that's where I don't know that the timing really matters. I feel like it's no different now than it would be, say, like October, November. Other players, yeah. But right now, I think with Collins, that doesn't matter either way. Like, what do you think of that?
I mean, yeah, I don't think that's the worst argument in the world. I just don't know how I could like. I understand Brad Robbins is going to be the punter. I just can't. We haven't seen it yet. We've seen Brad Robbins punt in how many mini camp practices where
3.
a bunch of dudes were like walking around basically. Like we haven't seen it yet. We haven't seen Myles Murphy actually have to use a move on an NFL offensive tackle yet. We can assume that Myles Murphy is going to be pretty good. We can assume, because first round pick, got the pedigree, got the athleticism. We can assume that Brad Robbins is going to be a pretty solid punter. Judging by what we've seen, it's just what they say when you assume. And I looked at some of the rookies on that list, and I was like, man, I don't see it. And if Collins can play as he did at the end of the season, because the Bengals are not going to get through a year with 5 offensive linemen through 17 regular season games, through however many playoff games they're going to play. You're not going to play 5 offensive linemen the whole time. You're going to have to dip into that. And I kind of look at that as, frankly, Travion Williams, like I look at him like another example. Yeah, we've seen what he can do, but Travion Williams might be the third running back on this team. I think La'el Collins actually has a shot to really step up and really be a pivotal depth piece on this team, considering just the attrition that happens on the offensive line.
Mike, what do you make of all of this?
I get what Andrew's saying. I think that the expectation, though, for Myles Murphy is that he will be the first person off the bench for the defense. And I'm not sure if La'el Collins will be the first person off the bench for the offense. I think that's is an assumption in terms of where his health is, how that offensive line competition shakes out. Like, I think it just can easily be Jackson Carman. And so I just hesitated with the idea of putting him ahead of Murphy, because I thought Murphy was surefire going to play and have a significant role within 400 snaps without somebody having to have an injury. So that's what did it for me in that case. And in terms of Travion Williams, I think he'll be the backup. And again, I think that he has sort of a guaranteed carved out role, where I sort of question that for Collins.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense too. And like, if I'm just looking at my list, like my personal list that I put together, like I had Myles Murphy at 24, whereas I know, like you mentioned, you had him at 23 and Andrew had him at 25. Yeah, like he's going to see the field more than La'el Collins. Like, I think you could even say like a lot of other guys, and I don't want to get too specific because I don't want to give any like hints away to the rest of the guys on our list, but like there's just so many more guys on the list who will see the field more, who will do more. And like, I'm going to be honest with you, like who I think are not just like better. I know it's hard to compare like a wide receiver to an offensive tackle. Like that's a little bit of an etchy argument, which you still have to make because you're making the top 25. But in terms of La'el Collins, one thing you said, Andrew, that I'm not sure about. So you said he was kind of steady down the stretch. I mean, so I get it. We're not necessarily basing it off of like 2022 performance as much as what we think they can do in 2023. But I
I mean,
saw a lot, like
you have to use that to kind of tell you about what's going to happen. But
to an extent, sure. But what I'm saying is like I don't know that in the first maybe this is a little bit unfair, but like the first 4 or 5 weeks, I don't know that he showed me enough to say that like this guy is a solid, surefire, right tackle. Like I don't know. Like I honestly don't think he's gonna be on the team past next year. Like even if he's healthy, even if he's a swing tackle, I don't really see a case where you keep him because let's say, okay, Jonah Williams does his year, 5th-year option, probably walks from what we've kind of talked about. I don't see them putting Lyle Collins back at right tackle. I think they're just gonna probably cut him and either go into free agency or draft a right tackle at that point. So
well,
I
that's
don't
good that
even know.
we're. Well, I was going to say that's good. We're not ranking the 2024 Bengals then, right?
Right, but like if you know this guy's not like even that much of a long-term asset, is it really worth putting him on the top 25?
Well,
Long
yeah. I
term
mean,
in terms of
I
like
mean,
because he's not good enough is what I'm saying in terms of like that kind of long term.
well, he's a 20. I mean, this is a 2023 list, so I long term, I frankly I didn't care about. I think when you talk about La'el Collins, I think that if we had seen kind of the inverse, like you were saying, yeah, he struggled early on. I remember there was a really bad miscommunication in Dallas. Where I think Micah Parsons just kind of came off the edge on block. That was La'el's job, very clearly La'el's job. Um, obviously there were kind of those mix ups early on, and you saw those problems early on. If you were to flip his season, maybe where, he was playing, okay to start, playing pretty steady to start, a part of an offensive line that was pretty solidified as the year went along. If that was the unit that starts, and then you get La'el Collins of week 1, 2, 3, if you get that La'el Collins towards the end of the season, then yeah, then I would have a problem with this, and I mean, he wouldn't be on the list. We wouldn't be talking about him right now. I just thought he did get better, and if you're talking about a guy who, I mean, if he can come back after a month, 6 weeks, I still think right now you have to put him there just because you're doing projections for guys that we don't know. We haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I think the long term stuff sort of doesn't matter with this list since it's for 2023. But I think you're underestimating sort of his physical state, in terms of like Chidobe
Exactly.
Awuzie and Jonah Williams. We saw them, I don't know, moving a lot better.
Yep.
Particularly in Chidobe Awuzie's case, he looked very ready for sort of, full go. Whereas La'el Collins has posted some videos of himself, but he did very little in sort of the viewing windows that we
Mm-hmm.
saw. So, I think it is, you talk about questions in terms of what Miles Murphy can do. He's cut, La'el Collins had a bad tear. So, I think there are questions mark. And I mean, this is at that point of the list where there are going to be question marks because, you're past the starters. But for me, it was just too much to overcome to try to give him a spot.
Yeah, like that's what I was actually about to say. Like you beat me to it, Mike. Like, okay, maybe if I'm being harsh about his talent, which I actually do want to get to that in a second. Like he's coming off a pretty serious injury, and his came, pretty late in the year compared to Chidobe Awuzie, who's obviously doing a lot better, who I think is going to be ready for training camp and probably week 1. But like we can make a pretty safe bet of saying that like he being Collins probably won't be ready for training camp and certainly won't be ready for week 1. And even when he's back, when he's healthy and the doctors and the trainers clear him, like, is he adverse? Like, is he risk averse to any injuries? I don't know. Like, once you get those injuries, like, it's not uncommon for guys to, like, kind of have those lingering issues. And on top of all of that, like, if, we remember last year before he even got hurt, like, he had a veterans rest day. Like, he was already taking, I think it was usually Wednesdays where he just did not practice. And I think occasionally DJ Reader did, but I mean, Lyle Collins pretty much every week, every Wednesday had that day off up until his injury, obviously. So he's already kind of being limited in practice. Having the injury doesn't help. He's going to be 30 this year. Like, there's just not a lot of good things trending his way going into next year. Even if I'm looking too far ahead past next year, I just don't see a lot of good things trending his way. And that's why I was hesitant to put him on that list. There's certainly a case. I do hear what Andrew is saying. Like, Mike and I agree on that. I just don't know if it's enough of a case for me to put him at 25. But I do want to look at some PFF numbers, though, since Andrew, you said he got better down the stretch. So compared to like the first 8 weeks, yeah, he actually did do better. Like his grades blocking wise were like 57, 50, 56. And then at the end of the year, he was kind of averaging that like 67 to 70 range. But here's the thing, though. 2019 in Dallas, 86. 2020, I don't think he played. 2021, 80. Last year, 57. So even if he did get better down the stretch, which I agree with, he still had a pretty big drop-off from his last year in Dallas. So you don't think the drop-off will get worse going into next year when he's healthy?
We're gonna find out. No, the PFF grades are one thing. I mean, we all have eyes. We all kind of saw him struggle in pass protection. We all kind of saw him, play actually pretty well, I thought, in the run game. I never really believe players when they say this is the healthiest I've been, or this is the best I've ever felt in my entire career. I have just never kind of given that any thought, because every player would say that every year. That I tried to do this offseason and now I feel great, or I changed up this or changed up that. So I mean, we'll see. Obviously the back stuff with Collins was lingering. If you can get, but I do think if he can come back healthy at some point decently early in the season, you're probably talking about, I mean, because we're talking about the 25th guy on our list here. We're not exactly talking about, number 11. If you can get good quality depth performance out of this guy, I think you're feeling good about it. And, frankly, I think he's, Jackson Carman was another option for me here, but, I just think
really,
look, because you already kind of heard my explanation for rookies. Charlie Jones, I had a hard time putting him up there. Chase Brown, who I think is going to be their RB2, hard time. Miles Murphy, DJ Turner, like I just kind of had a hard time putting those guys in there. So then who are you talking about? You Sidney Jones, Joseph Osai, like those are the kind of players that you're talking about. So I just think that if, presuming that Collins is going to play, which again, it might not be it might not be a slam dunk. I just think you're going to get the best level of production out of him.
Jackson Carman, that's an interesting one. I mean, we don't even know if he's going to play next year, because of course it depends on like how he does in training camp and where they put him. But bold options.
Well,
why I like that.
Start
though.
the year. I think it's pretty safe to say that Carman is going to start the year. If Collins, let's say he has to start on the PUP list or something. If the Bengals are going to start Jonah Williams at right tackle, Carman is going to probably be that sixth swing tackle. I would probably wager a lot of money that he's your first guy to kind of move to left or right tackle, depending on how much you want to upset the apple cart. So yeah, we'll see.
It's a good point. It's a good point.
Yeah, Carman, I think kind of has him beat right now. I am curious, let's say week 9 rolls around and Jonah Williams separates his shoulder and needs a few weeks. Who do they go to at right tackle? We'll see.
We shall see. Well, like I mentioned earlier, we have lots of great submissions from our listeners as to why they're a Bengals fan. We are going to read one of them and talk about it, because this is actually a very interesting response that I think actually elicits a great discussion. But we'll have that when we return right here on the Strictly Stripes podcast. All right, thanks for staying with us on the Strictly Stripes podcast. We talked about La'el Collins being number 25 on our top 25 Bengals going into 2023. A really, really interesting discussion that I think, depending on how the rest of these go, I think this will be one of the most interesting ones, because a lot of provocative thought went into this one. Before we get into reading our first response as to why one of our listeners is a Bengals fan, I want to remind you guys to sign up for our Strictly Stripes newsletter by going to cleveland.com/newsletters and sign up for our Cincinnati Football Insider subtext service, which you're probably wondering, what is there to text people about in the offseason? A lot, like our top 25 rankings we're doing, getting people's thoughts and opinions on that, which those opinions we bring up on the podcast here, like that drives our discussion. So you want to help drive the discussion, go for it. We give our predictions and our takes, ahead of training camp, because it's going to be here in no time. July 26th will be here in no time. We give our takes on that, and you can give us your takes, which, like I said, drives the podcast us. So make sure you sign up for that. It is well worth your time. So I am reading this response. I'm pulling it up here. It is from Phil Mast, who is the owner of Mops and Muscles Complete Cleaning LLC. That I actually like that, Mops and Muscles. That's a good name. So I'm going to read the response here, word for word here. Just stumbled upon the article. Not sure how I missed it. So I got to tell you why I'm a Bengals fan. I always tell people because I'm a front runner. Well, kinda. I grew up in NE, Ohio, Northeast Ohio. Okay, Browns territory, in a small town called Garrettsville, and my family loved the Browns. Case in point, I was in the 3rd grade in the late 80s when I got into football, and my best friend was a huge 49ers fan. And since it was Bengals Niners in the Super Bowl that year, all I heard from him was everything 49ers because I wanted to be different. I staked my claim to be officially a Bengals fan. Plus, I loved Tigers as a kid. Okay. And on a recent annual, this is good, on a recent annual golf trip at Northern Michigan, while playing poker with a bunch of drunk guys, a non-drunk guy informed me that, quote, a Bengal is a tiger, LOL. Shortly after becoming a Bengals fan, I got a dog, which was a beagle, and named him Boomer after Boomer Esiason. And as we can see, being a front runner back then totally backfired. For the rest of my childhood, that was painful and what seems to be most of my adult life as well. Not anymore, though. All caps, hooday. So that that is good. That is really good. Do you guys think a Bengal? So a Bengal is a tiger, right? I know it's a silly question, but is a Bengal actually a tiger? I think, right?
Yeah.
I'm not a what's the term for like people who are experts at that? I don't even know, a zoologist or whatever. That is interesting, but I like what he talked about with the Bengals Niners rivalry. I feel like those two Super Bowls in the 80s, in 81 and in 88, which were both against Montana, the first one in the old Silver Dome that doesn't exist, and the second one in Miami, I feel like that actually got a lot of people into the Bengals. Like, you talk about Boomer, he won MVP. I think, yeah, the Bengals were kind of a bandwagon team back then until they fell off in the 90s. And you sort of see that parallel now, like, where obviously you got Joe Burrow, you've got like these likable guys, where you have like this bandwagon team essentially to some people, I would think. But the thing I wanted to really zoom in on was like Bengals 49ers. If you really think about it, like, I know we talked about this a little bit, like the year the Bengals played the Rams in the Super Bowl, it was very close to being a Super Bowl 23 rematch with the 49ers. Like, and it almost happened again last year if the Bengals beat the Chiefs and if the 49ers beat the Eagles in Philadelphia with or without Brock Purdy on their 4th quarterback. So I don't know, like, I'm just trying to think here. Like, if the Bengals had played the Niners 2 years ago in LA in the SoFi Stadium, like, how could you have seen that game going? Like, do you think that would have actually been a better Super Bowl than the one we saw with the Rams?
Well, I think, you asked kind of a similar question like a week or so ago. What would have happened if
The Bengals played the
if
Eagles.
yeah, again, I mean, we're talking about a Super Bowl that, I mean, the winning touchdown was scored with how many minutes left in the game, and it changed
I
the
think it was
game, it changed the
a
lead.
minute 12 to go.
Yeah, so it was a minute left or whatever, and that touchdown happens. The Bengals get to midfield, only needing a field goal where you probably need like 10 yards to try an Evan McPherson game tying kick. Yeah, it's just, I mean, that game was so exciting. It's just hard to beat. I have a hard time saying that.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, what ifs? I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe, but maybe it would have been a much worse game. Who knows?
could have been. So maybe compared to a what if, maybe sort of looking ahead, do you think there's a good chance both teams meet in the Super Bowl this year? I think there is. At the very least, I think both teams get back to the AFC Championship, or I should say, have a good chance of getting back to the AFC NFC Championship games.
Um,
Hmm. Brock
Yeah,
Purdy versus Joe Burrow.
we'll see what the decision at quarterback, for the 49ers, how that works out. I mean, they're banking on Purdy coming back from injury and obviously being, kind of replicating what he did for them last year. I think there's some risk in that, but they obviously have talent around him. Traded for Christian McCaffrey last year. So we'll see.
Which I
I
loved.
don't know. Pardon?
Which I loved that. I think that was a great move for them, getting CMC.
Okay, and then so I just think it will basically come down to what happens at quarterback.
So speaking of which, so I don't know if you saw this. This was a while back, but I never asked you all about this. So Greg Papa, he is the voice of the San Francisco 49ers. He was saying he's banking on putting Brandon Allen, who, as you guys know, played for the Bengals behind Joe Burrow the last 3 years. He's banking on them, making him the backup behind Purdy and trading away Trey Lance. Now, we saw little to nothing from Brandon Allen last year, I think, except the Carolina game where he played in garbage time. I mean, I don't know how I feel about that. Like, nothing against Brandon Allen, but, I mean, Trey Lance is still a first-round pick, and, like, they got Sam Darnold as well, who, I don't know. I could see Sam Darnold being ahead of Brandon Allen on the depth chart. Like, could this guy actually be Brock Purdy's backup? Like, I don't know. That's just because there's a Bengals connection there. I don't know what you guys think of that.
I mean, you can get something of value for Lance and try to, get assets for now. So I don't see any problem with that.
No? Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, their quarterback situation is just so weird. I don't even know what to make of it at this point.
I mean, just the fact that, like, this is nothing against Brock Purdy. I actually think, like, he is in the driver's seat to be the starter, assuming, like, he's healthy with his elbow. Like, I just still can't believe they went as far as they did with their third-string backup. Because what? You lose Garoppolo, you lose Lance, or I guess it was a reverse order, but you lose both of them, basically, and then, yeah, that is just weird to me, which I guess is a reflection of how good of a coach Shanahan is and how good their defense was and still is, and, the playmakers they have, like George Kittle and CMC, like I mentioned, but it's like a weird good team. They are a weird good team. That's the best way I can describe that situation. But yeah, since you mentioned quarterback, it reminded me of Brandon Allen because, yeah, there's always a Bengals connection somehow. But we are going to have another awesome top 25 discussion. We've already revealed number 24 on our list, and that is Myles Murphy. We're going to talk about Myles Murphy tomorrow. We talked about a little bit today. Whether he's ranked too high or too low, what that means for everyone else, and much more. But once again, for myself and the mic, I'm Muhammad Ahmad. We'll see you on Wednesday.